Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Gibson. I'm starting a somewhat new tradition. At least over the past 4 or 5 days, I've been having a cup of tea around the same time I have my cup of coffee, and it seems to be the podcasting drink of choice as of now. And I can blame my British friend, Seb Ostrovich, for that. But, not to deviate the show too much from where we're headed, I'd like to welcome today's guest, who is Adam Storey. Adam, I know we're going to go into your background, your accolades, all of that good stuff, but you're actually a day ahead. You're in New Zealand. How are things with you right now? I know it's like the morning. Your day's just getting started, but how's everything going?
Yeah, no, you're first of all, thanks for having me on your show today. And you did right. It's just after 7:30 here on a Friday morning, so sun's just cracking up, and it's good looking day out there, so I'm excited.
That's fantastic. I'm always amazed by what technology allows us to do and connecting with people across the globe, and the time difference, and even sometimes the seasonal difference. And I'm assuming the weather is completely different from what it's like in the US right now. What's the weather looking like?
Yeah, well, we've just entered autumn, so I mean it's still really, really nice conditions at the moment. So sun's up relatively early. I mean, we're looking at sort of around 25 degrees. So I'm not too sure, what that converts to Fahrenheit, but no, it's still pretty summery for us, which is awesome.
And what's the weather like most of the time in New Zealand? I imagine it can get like blisteringly hot, but is it kind of like California in that it's like mostly sunny, mostly temperate, pretty comfortable?
Yeah, you did right. I mean, like we don't, where I'm based in Auckland, we don't get any snowfall during the winter, for example. So, I mean, we can pretty much rock, shorts and t-shirts pretty much all year round if you're lucky. Rain's probably our biggest thing we get every now and then, but yeah, and I guess the other thing that catches out people is we don't have much of an ozone layer over the southern hemisphere, which is quite interesting. So, even though the actual temperatures don't seem that hot, we get a lot of overseas people come out here and think, oh, it's not that hot, I'm not going to get sunburnt, and they just absolutely get wasted. So, yeah, sunscreen is a massive thing for us down here in New Zealand.
So, have you kind of lived in New Zealand your entire life, or has work and play kind of moved you around at all?
New Zealand born and bred, so I've definitely spent a lot of time overseas through work, but not in a living situation. So at best I would have been overseas for sort of 3-month stints here and there with different teams and that. But I guess I just love New Zealand too much to uproot. So it's a really good spot down here.
No, it makes a lot of sense. And you kind of hearing that, you talked about working with different teams. And I'd love to get into kind of what you're doing now, because I know you got away from weightlifting somewhat, but how did your interest in athletics kind of evolve, and when did the academic side of things see that same interest to where you were starting to pursue it from more of a researcher position versus kind of the coach or athlete position?
Yeah. I mean, it's, I guess, if I think about it, being involved in high performance sport is something that I always aspired to, even from a high school level. Like a lot of my friends back in high school, they were sort of umming and ahhing about what they'd study in university and what they'd want to pursue. But like as I mentioned, like for whatever reason, from a really early age, I was always obsessed with the Olympics. I can remember vividly watching the 1988 Seoul Olympics and seeing Naeem Sulimanulu whack out those, triple bodyweight clean and jerks. And, as a kid, I just couldn't really comprehend how heavy that was. I mean, to me, Naeem, I could see he was short. I was thinking, oh, surely this guy he's not much taller than me, so that can't be that heavy, can it? I mean, I had no concept of weight as a kid, as you do. But yeah, for whatever reason, and I've said this to many people, is obsessed with the Olympics from the word go, but weightlifting was the sport. And again, watching Naeem, it just was burnt into my brain. So I mean, pretty much from Seoul onwards, watched every Commonwealth Games and Olympic Games there was on TV. And again, just I guess that sent the wheels in motion for me wanting to have a career in sport, whether it was being an athlete or in a coaching capacity. So, yeah, no, definitely got into, I was competing in weightlifting while I was doing my undergrad degree, and then eventually my knees got a little bit old and creaky, so then I transitioned into coaching, and I was basically a junior coach working under our current New Zealand head coach at the time. And it was a fascinating journey. Like, we had our old coach, Nigel Avery. He was the Commonwealth Games gold medalist from 2002, and he also went to the Sydney Olympics. So he had a great background as a super heavyweight. And Nigel spent a lot of his time over in Germany, during his training phases. So by default, a lot of our training that we were exposed to was that really high volume work. So that's probably the reason why my knees packed in pretty early. But then, interestingly, like once Nigel transitioned out from coaching, and we got in a new coach, Ari Moilanen from Finland. Ari's pretty much background in terms of weightlifting coaching and being an athlete himself was through the Bulgarian system. Yes, I mean, at that time I was coaching, and I was programming a lot of my athletes coming through based off Nigel's philosophies that he picked up from Germany and whatnot. And then I was looking at Ari's work, and it was, as you know, the Bulgarian system's chalk and cheese. It's high intensity stuff versus the super high volumes. And yeah, I mean, it was a different shift in mindset for our lifters. It was a different shift in mindset for me as a coach, because I was watching these athletes initially struggling with this new training model. They were getting absolutely smashed around. There's a lot of questions saying, this, I don't think this kind of training structure is right for us, where we just can't handle it. But then, interestingly, after a 6-month breaking in period, like literally breaking in period, yeah, the lifters just started to adapt, and just crazy things started to happen in terms of their PBs, and both in training and competition, but also, I guess, their mental resiliency towards training was just completely changed. Like, they were training harder than they'd ever trained before, ever thought they could train. So that sort of got me thinking from an academic point of view, like, what the hell is going on here? How can these lifters literally tolerate this kind of high intensity loading 2 to 3 times per day? I mean, leading into Beijing Olympics, the lifters were on triple day trainings. And that, at the time I was looking at all the American College of Sports Medicine recommendations around high intensity stuff, and our training and the training of the Bulgarian system was in complete contrast to that. And I guess that's what formed the my PhD question to kind of investigate that.
That's interesting. I think a lot of us can kind of visualize what a high volume program looks like, especially people who are kind of more involved with the coaching side and track something like repetitions or, relative intensities, stuff like that. You can imagine what a really high volume program would look like. But when we toss around the word Bulgarian or the concept of the Bulgarian training system or methodology,
yep,
that can take many different shapes and sizes, because what Abajev did, you could argue, is the Bulgarian system, because he was there and, he was able to make changes, call weights, all of that stuff. Yep. The athletes were able to also make changes and kind of call weights as they deemed appropriate. There are all those funny stories. One specifically, I remember Dave Spitz telling, where one of the lifters went to the phone and called the gym, so Ivan would have to answer it and take it, because he said it was his daughter on the line. Yeah. And he changed the weight that was on the bar. He kind of picked it up and dropped it. And when Abajev walked back in, he's like, "Oh yeah, that felt really tough." And he's like, okay, move on. So the Bulgarian system, it's interesting to think about, and I wonder how that can change from coach to coach. So when Ari was implementing it, what did that look like? I mean, you mentioned training 3 times a day, but was it kind of that 45-minute session, 1 to 6 singles at a heavier weight? Do you have a little bit more detail you can put to that?
it was, I guess, highly modified to what I guess Abizhayev was initially pumping out. But interesting though, because I mean Ari had a good relationship with Abizhayev, and during our build-up for the 2014 Commonwealth Games in Glasgow, we went and did a big training camp over in Finland, which was awesome. So it was great for us just to be able to nip over from Finland straight to Scotland for the competition. But at the time, the timing worked out really well, because the high performance centre that we were training at, they were holding like a big sports science conference, and Ivan Abizhayev was actually one of the guest speakers.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so it was cool. I got to sit in on a seminar with him and pump a few questions towards his way. But I can chat about that later. But going back to your question around the actual training structure, so typically, the morning session for the lifters would be anywhere between, say, 45 to an hour. And that would be pretty stock standard compound movement. So either a front squat or back squat variation, and then typically some heavy pulls to follow. So either heavy snatch pulls versus clean pulls. The lunchtime or midday session would be sort of more power-based stuff, so power snatch, power clean, and possibly some overhead work, so whether that's jerks and blocks or power jerks and blocks. And then in the afternoon, it was pretty meat and potatoes, 3 movements, heavy snatches, heavy cleans, heavy front squats. The afternoons were tough. You typically work up to classic close to or near to maximums, and you'd have anywhere between 3 to 6 attempts at those of snatch, clean and jerk, and front squat. And then I guess when you look retrospectively at the target loads for the given morning session, I mean, they were still pretty high for a morning session as well, anywhere between sort of 90 to 95%. In some instances for the squats and the pulls as well. So 2 heavy loadings, morning and afternoon, and as I said, just more of a power-based variation, which I guess you could arguably say is a primer for the afternoon, was done midday.
There's another story. I think it was Dave Spitz. He was talking about when Donnie Schenkel, so he trained at Cal Strength for a while under Glenn Pinlay, and he took a trip to the Olympic Training Center when it was still around, and he mentioned that when Donnie was at the OTC, his technique seemed to clean up, his body composition seemed to change favorably, and he thought it was due to the lower intensities, the greater volume, probably more exercise variation, stuff like that. And I can't speak specifically to that, but I remember him talking about his lockout looking cleaner, him looking leaner. And that kind of brings me to the question of when you are training like that, what do you think that kind of does for technique, or what do you think the role of technique is with that style of training? Is it something where the athletes who were undergoing it were advanced enough, their technique could really lend to it? Or what kind of role does technique play in a more Bulgarian-style training program? And what did you see was kind of the result of that, if anything?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really, really, really great question, really great point. So I guess a question I often got asked when I was coaching, because people who knew me knew that I was exposed to, as I said, initially the German stuff and then the Bulgarians. They'd always ask me, what's your coaching philosophy? What kind of model do you follow? And I'd always just say it's definitely a hybrid. I mean, I see strengths in both of those models. Speaking specifically to your question, one point I'd raise is that, the Bulgarian system, unless your technique is completely dialed in, which, even the most elite of elite lifters are still working on that, the Bulgarian system's not going to be great for you, especially for young and developmental lifters. Like, I mean, as you mentioned, just having that exercise variation, just learning motor pattern competency, I think that's absolutely critical. And to do that, you need repetition. I mean, it's you can talk about that old 10,000 hours adage. I think that's extremely, extremely vital, and you're not necessarily going to be getting that. Yes, you'll be getting arguably more movement specificity doing the Bulgarian system with such limited or a reduced number of exercise modalities. But I think it comes down to repetition for movement skill. And when you look at our lifters who then transitioned onto the Bulgarian system or a variant of it under Ari, I mean, they were all extremely experienced. Anyway, at that stage, they'd been doing 11 to 12 years of consistent weightlifting prior to that. And again, it was all probably from a high volume type model. So, I mean, they had grooved their technique. They had done their 10,000 hours, so to speak. So I think for them, it was a good timing for the introduction of that higher intensity work.
You actually mentioned, pumping a few questions at Abajev. Do you specifically remember what those questions were about? Because I wonder, I know he had some, I guess, assumptions he operated off of for the construction of his kind of training paradigm. Looking back, it was really based around, I think, like hormone levels and how those would change, within and beyond 45 minutes. And that's kind of why the sessions were shorter. I think he had some stuff to do with like gene expression or, creating protein and all that stuff. The details are kind of fuzzy because it's admittedly hard to find information about that. But do you know a lot about everything that kind of underlaid his training paradigm, and then what kind of questions you did have for him or would still have for him?
Yeah, I mean, it was, as I said, it was such an uncanny experience that we were there at the time, and to be able to meet the butcher in person was absolutely awesome. And it was cool to see, like, as I said, him and Ari had a very, very good relationship. So that was cool as well. And interestingly, I mean, at the time, 2014, I would have been, 2 years into my PhD. So my essentially research question, I was looking at the gene expression changes in competitive weightlifters over different training phases. Yes, I mean, I had a lot of questions, I guess, directed towards Ivan around that specific stuff in terms of adaptation, because in his presentation, whether some of it was lost in translation, I just remember that, some of the physiology was quite off in terms of the rationale. And, whether that was a function of, as I said, lost in translation, or whether that was sort of physiology that was based off, 1970s to 1980s thinking versus I guess, they said this was 2014 stuff. A little bit was just like, I'm not too sure if that's exactly how it works in terms of adaptation, but that was interesting. And then I did ask him a question around the old steroid use as well. So I just asked him in the conference, I said, how did the lifters get by in terms of their recovery? Were they using any performance enhancing substances? And if so, how did you guys avoid detection? Because I mean, you look at their world champs and Olympic medal haul, and then all of a sudden it sort of vanishes when Abhijav's gone, which is always a bit of a red flag. And his response to me was, he adamantly said there was no steroid use. The lifters would just have vitamin E injections, and that was interesting. So I started looking into vitamin E a little bit more.
That's funny. I guess this is an interesting transition to the topic we wanted to get into for the podcast, which is, theory to practice. And looking at that training paradigm, we can see there might have been a lot of underlying assumptions that may have been unfounded or maybe, not necessarily correct based on what we know now, but it was still effective. So, yep. And you kind of proceeded to study this, and I'm actually really interested in hearing you talk more about your dissertation. I don't know if I've looked specifically at that paper, but maybe we can go from your dissertation and kind of cover your study of the sport up until now, and then we can talk about how that does inform practice, and if it does matter, given that results kind of speak for themselves, in the role of science in making those results more consistent. So let's tuck into your dissertation, and I guess we can kind of start from ground zero and work until completion.
Yeah, no, it sounds good. And I guess sort of going back to that Abhijav's work and his philosophies. I mean, there's no way, shape, or form am I bagging him or his his methods, because I mean or anyone's methods. I mean, as you said, like, it's clearly they produce results, and to this day, you know, if I was still coaching weightlifters, I'd be prescribing programs based somewhat around his philosophy. So I think it's absolutely critical. And yeah, and then going to the PhD, because I mean, essentially the cohort that I studied was our New Zealand international team, and basically they were rolling with that Bulgarian variant program. So it was all about looking at the effects of this repeated high frequency, high intensity exercise. So I guess I looked at it from a couple of points of view. So when I was initially putting the question together, you know, PhD is a long journey. So I wanted to make sure it was going to be something that was going to be of interest to me, that I was highly passionate about, and it was ultimately going to influence what I was doing at the time. So as I said, I was coaching for the New Zealand team. I'd taken over from Ari at that point in time. So yeah, I thought, I mean, what better way? And essentially, when I was trying to think about what are the key variables I'd like to measure, you know, it's a lot of the hormonal stuff had previously been done in the mid to late 90s, and I guess the new frontier that hadn't really been tapped into was gene expression changes. But then when you look at gene expression, I mean, you got around 23,000 genes. Like, where do you start? I mean, and at the time, like a lot of the oncological work going into gene expression influences following exercise, that was just coming out. You know, there's publications around that identified the genes associated with speed, and you know, identified one or two genes. But to say, you know, one or two genes that were associated with speed, that's a pretty far cry. Yeah. So then I was, you know, having a big chat with my supervisor around that, and then a relatively new technology was available to us, and that was called a microarray analysis. And a microarray essentially allows you to take a biological sample, whether it being muscle or blood, and basically scan the entire genome for changes in any gene pathway. So that's the approach we did. We took a bit of a shotgun approach to start with. So took some blood samples from the lifters, had them put them through the microarray analyses, and out of the 23,000 genes that we scanned, we could see that around 112 key gene pathways were clearly elevated within these lifters following different training phases. Mm-hmm. So during the study, the main data collection followed them during a typical training cycle. So it was following a deload period, 2 weeks of heavy loading, and then following another deload. So following that 2 weeks of heavy, as I said, those 112 gene pathways were just lighting up like Christmas lights. So once I then had basically narrowed it down from 23,000 to 112, then I looked at those 112 pathways to see, you know, is there something within those pathways that is painting a bit of a picture? And it was. So, I mean, within that 112, those 112 pathways, a lot of them are involved in protein turnover, tissue recovery, muscle repair, muscle regeneration, all those kind of key pathways. Mm-hmm. So basically it showed us that, you know, these lifters have just this unbelievable ability to recover quick. So to confirm that, I mean, I took a group of highly trained, resistance trained individuals who weren't weightlifters, put them on a similar type of training structure in terms of that repeated high intensity stuff, and basically track these same genomic pathways for muscle repair, muscle adaptation, and their responses were significantly blunted compared to the weightlifters. So again, it's evidence to say that, you know, these weightlifters who had that repeated exposure to this type of modality almost had that Wolverine ability to get smashed, and then they just regenerate. But then I guess the old chicken and egg situation is we don't know, you know, whether these lifters were naturally born with this ability, or whether it's, you know, epigenetics at play where, you know, repeated exposure to either an environmental or a training stimulus will change your genomic response to that. So, it's fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I actually had this similar conversation a couple times the last few days because I've spoken to people who Travis Cooper is a good example. He's been weightlifting for 17 years, and he trained with Muscle Driver for a long time, and they were doing 2-a-days. I think like 5 or 6 days a week, and then going to max almost every day. And I just wonder, because then I know other people who train 3 days a week with seemingly less volume and seemingly further from failure and get more tweaks and more beat up and have to take more time off. Whereas Travis was able to handle all of that. And, he mentioned obviously his time training leading up to that. And we can kind of speculate on if it was proper preparation or if it was some sort of like genetic inclination. Do you have any any thoughts on that? If there is something that makes these athletes more resilient, or if we found anything that could speak to a genetic kind of propensity to being more resilient to harder training, and if that's one thing that you can kind of put in the bucket as the very, very talented athletes are generally more resilient because of this trait.
Yeah, man, that's a great question. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, man, where do I start with that one? I guess when we sort of go back to Abajayev, his concept was, I'd heard that he'd said that, lifters were sometimes like a carton of eggs, and you throw that carton of eggs as hard as you can against the wall, and the one that doesn't break, that's your lifter. And when I look back at our lifters, sometimes that was the case when some people were trying to transition or make that transition from the high volume to the high intensity. There was a lot of breakage, and those that survived went on to do amazing things. And then when I take another step further, I can't name names just due to the subject privacy. But when I took looking at the gene profiles of those individuals that really did survive, there is a story within their genomic response. They had pathways that were on paper. You're sort of looking at these individual genes. Because it was quite a cool journey, because as soon as a gene gets highlighted from the results as a gene of interest, you then have to sort of go into quite a long and detailed investigation as to what pathways that gene then controls as well. And that's what I'm saying with the one or two genes that have been associated with speed. It doesn't quite work like that, because one gene basically ignites a whole pathway or a whole network of downstream effects. So it's not just one little thing, it's a whole multitude of things. And you've got to make sure that whole downstream pathway is actually relevant. And then, so when I was looking at some of these genes, initially, you're thinking, oh shit, they're not really related, because some of their primary functions are in terms of hair growth, nail growth, skin turnover. But then when you sort of look at those genes further than those pathways, again, all that kind of tissue growth then leads into tendon recovery, tendon rigidity. So then you're thinking, okay, shit, these guys and girls have got gene pathways that have got links to, having stronger, tougher, more resilient tendons. So yes, I mean, there is a genomic link that shows that, there's things that are working in their favor. But then again, it's, I've been interviewed on this topic in the past as well. Is it a case of genetics versus talent, or talent and hard work, and which would you place more weight on? And I guess my answer is always hard work, because you can have the genetic profile and the natural talent as much as that as you want, but if you don't have the actual innate drive to make the most of that, you're not going to go anywhere. And that's, I guess, something that we can't necessarily quantify as someone's true resilience. And I guess, going back to what I mentioned at the start, I mean, that's one thing I really did notice from a subjective point of view when we did transition from the high volume to the high intensity was just our resilience of our lifters just stepped up. I mean, they were training harder than they ever thought they could possibly train. So that was, I guess, something as a real take-home message for me.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so much here that I'm really excited to kind of dive further into it. But just to rewind a little bit, when you did make that transition from more of the higher volume training to the higher intensity training, one thing that I think people always ask about when they're transitioning to more of like a peaking style of training or more of like this Bulgarian style of training, high intensity style of training, is what do you do with misses? Like, how are misses handled within this system of going to a maximal effort, which a maximal effort is, the max of your capabilities. It's the max lift you can make, and to find that sometimes would take a miss here and there, but those misses can accumulate and then create unnecessary fatigue, if there are too many of them. So how was that handled, I guess, within your team? Because obviously we could speculate on misses in a training program, but just specifically within that instance, how did you all manage misses within the training program?
Man, that is a great question. And that's probably an area that people just don't even worry about, misses. It's such an important area. Man, that's so many good things around that. So misses, I guess, misses I could see from a couple of points of view: good, bad, and ugly. It's misses are always such a good learning opportunity. I mean, that's one thing I really like and respect around that Bulgarian variant type of training, is just that frequent exposure to that high intensity stuff, and frequent, you got to be on the knife's edge. So then going into competition, the lifters have got that feel for the weight. They've got that experience of what to do in those high intensity, like 1RM, your third attempt on that bar, what are you going to do kind of moments, versus the high volume stuff. We always found that we were never really exposed to that top end stuff. It was all about, you lay that massive foundation, and then on competition day, you'll be good for it. And it's just like, well, geez, we haven't even really maxed it. We've only maxed out maybe once or twice within this 12-week cycle, So there, in terms of the misses, it provided that good mental exposure. I guess the bad thing was, whether this was a lot of ego-driven stuff where lifters would clearly miss a weight, and, despite coaches' recommendations, peer recommendations, they'd always be going back to attempt that same weight 2 or 3 times, and it would just be getting ugly. So to the point where, one, you're putting yourself at grave risk of injury. 2, you're just reinforcing a terrible motor pattern. So they were my primary concerns. We're looking at from that point of view, especially from the risk of injury. And I guess thirdly, you're really smacking yourself in terms of your confidence. But so in terms of misses, what our typical thing would be is we'd have maybe 2 attempts at a miss, and if they weren't going to be getting it, it was clear they weren't going to be getting it after that second one. So then we'd basically drop down and do a wave load, so they'd potentially build back up from a 3-2-1 again, or a double, a single, that kind of thing, just to rework up and make sure that patterning in terms of technique was there. Yeah, because we could easily, well, not easily, but you could differentiate. Okay, was that miss due to fatigue, or was it a miss due to a technical breakdown? So, if it was due to a technical breakdown, that dropping down and doing the wave loading to rework up to that worked really well. But if it was fatigue, you'd have to make that call early to protect that lifter from injury, or
I think that's fascinating. And when you have the more aggressive style of training, that is the high intensity approach, it is really delicate, and it is like walking on that razor's edge of trying to do as much as possible, but just not doing too much, which that line kind of gets blurred.
Yeah.
And it takes like the collaboration of the coach and the athlete to try and figure out where that kind of would lie. After your dissertation, you have still been pumping out a lot of great work in the sports science realm. That's I've seen cited everywhere with respect to either RPE or squatting or the training of a weightlifter. After your dissertation, how were you motivated to continue that academic role? And then you also said you took over as the coach for the national team at some point. What was that transition like, and how did you handle accepting the responsibility and following in the footsteps of some seemingly fantastic coaches?
Yeah, no, it was. Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting transition. Yeah, I mean, this, as I mentioned, sort of followed not long after Beijing. When Ari headed back to Finland. So for me, it was a massive honour, a big responsibility. I was sort of just over halfway with my PhD, and so I remember even at London Olympics, a lot of the athletes, once they'd finished competing, they were out. I could hear the craziness going on in the village, but I was stuck up in my room trying to finish off my PhD right up. So some of it was a little bit gnarly. Like I look back on it and laugh, but no, it was really good. And I guess I've always just been so appreciative of the people that I've been involved with and surrounded with. So whether that's my athletes, I'm still really, really good friends with all the athletes that I coached, but also with the coaches that I worked with, to the point where, we named our little daughter after my coach, and everyone's like, how did you name your daughter Nigel? And it's like, no, we named her Avery after the surname. So not often do you name your daughter after a super heavyweight weightlifter, but that's, I guess, the level of respect and appreciation that I did hold for my coach. And I guess, from a coaching point of view, like those, and that's one thing, an ethos that I always brought into my own coaching is, I don't just want to be a technical coach. I want to be someone that can inspire people to do stuff outside of their sport as well. And that's exactly what Nigel did to me. Like, he was just and still is just an awe-inspiring human. Hence the reason, you named our daughter after him. But, so I guess that really gave me the rationale to continue on with my research as well. So I've got a supervisory position at AUT where I supervise masters and PhD students there. So it's cool to see, I've got a lot of really eager people coming through in the strength and conditioning and exercise physiology spaces. And I guess with all my students, it's one thing I always smash home to them is don't just focus on academia. Like I was able to do both the academia plus full on coaching at the same time, and they just work so harmoniously together. And and the S&C world, that's what you need. Unfortunately, you need time on the tools, and a lot of people can easily lose sight of that. They think a degree is going to get them everything they want, but it's the time and tools which is the most important.
Yeah. How were you able to, seeing so much success, or seeing, a good amount of success as a weightlifting coach, and then also being able to provide athletes and coaches and scientists with, seemingly the same quality of service? How were you able to blend the two? And did you find that they would kind of harmoniously work together, and that the science would inform practice, or was it more so practice would inform where the science would go, and then it would help act as an explanation for what people have been doing for decades? Or was it kind of where one was benefited, the other was benefited, and it just depended on the focus of either that would drive the opposite, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it does, mate. You got some good questions this morning. I love it. I guess in terms of one thing I've always said to people is in relation to how do I find managing all the workloads and things like that, it's around just, I guess, the word passion. and I say to people, as long as you can find your passion, that'll just drive you. Like time and energy will come to you. You'll just be able to knock it out. So I guess that's the take-home message. And the take-home message I always tell my students, they I'll have potential masters and PhD students come to me asking, what should I do for a thesis topic? And I'm like, no, you tell me. I mean, you're looking at 2 to 4 years of your life invested into a research project. So you need to be damn passionate about it, because I'm not going to be the one that's going to be dragging you along. I'll happily push you along that journey, but I'm not going to drag you along that journey. So that's the one message I always tell them. Yeah, and in terms of, I guess, research questions, again, that's a great one from you, mate. I mean, I guess when I reflect on my research, I think a majority of it has come from practice informing science. I think, there can be a lot of the reverse, obviously science trying to inform practice. But often I see that kind of stuff as being quite flash in the pan, kind of, oh yeah, that didn't work in the real world kind of thing. So I guess what I've often done is sort of looked at what are some weird, well, not necessarily weird, but what are some methods that are being done in the real world and have been done for decades, which just don't fit what literature says, and just trying to get some rationale behind that. I mean, these days now, I'm probably doing a little bit of the latter as well. Like, for example, one of my PhD students who just finished, Dustin Aranchuk, we looked at some eccentric quasi-isometric stuff, which is just a different type of sort of muscle contraction, and we're now looking to see how that can be integrated into a real world setting, more so from not only a rehab point of view, but from a performance point of view as well.
Now, you've also done, because you worked with Eric Helms, you've done a lot of work on the RPE scale and RPE, RIR, and its usefulness in like a powerlifting setting, or at least with, the slower movements like a squat, a bench, and a deadlift.
Yep.
Is that something where after you undertook that, and I don't know if you had any thoughts or opinions on it beforehand, but after you helped him with that work, has that informed the way you think about training now, or you would prescribe training? And do you think I guess this is a big question in weightlifting, because for some reason, when I think about where powerlifting and weightlifting sit in kind of like, if we want to call it like the evidence-based realm, I think weightlifting still relies on a lot of the older research done in the 70s and 80s by the Soviets. And, there's more stuff on the biomechanics of the lifts. And I think less training research. But in powerlifting, there seems to be a lot of that going on, where we're looking at like RPE, or we're looking at kind of different concepts within powerlifting specific populations. I don't know entirely why that is. I don't know if it's like a trained thing, the complexity of the movements, the availability of athletes to use in research. I don't know why, but I guess that was a long-winded way to ask, how RPE would be used in the weightlifting context, or if there is any usefulness of it after you've done the work with Eric Helms.
No, definitely. I mean, it's to be fair, like when I guess I'm just trying to think, when Eric came on, I took him on as a student, it was, like, I'm just trying to think back when I was coaching, and no, from memory, we weren't doing a lot of RP, if any at all, with the lifters. So when Eric, I was initially having chats with Eric around the start of his thesis, and I was thinking, RPE, man, really? Like, there's got to be more stuff in there than that. And then, but then obviously we validated the RPE and repetitions in reserve against, LPT and other measures as well. So we've got subjective, we've got qualitative plus quantitative validation there, which is really, really cool. And I guess it's, his whole thesis was, really speaks to the keep things simple. Such a simple, basic measure is so powerful. And yes, you can periodize and prescribe really, really effectively off those measures, RPE or RAR. And I guess nowadays with the other athletes I work with, I do integrate that. I don't solely base the periodization off that, but it is a metric that I do frequently ask and record with the various athletes. And again, I know, and that's based on the fact that I know it is extremely reliable. It's fascinating, isn't it? And I guess really great point around the literature and research around weightlifting versus powerlifting. And I think, that's something that's always baffled me as well. And I think from my opinion around why people are almost scared to touch the weightlifting training research is because it's come from the Soviet, the Eastern Bloc countries. It's so seminal. Like, how dare you question that? And it's like, well, I think now's the time to question it. And why not? Because it's what's worked in the 70s. That's not to say that's not right, but hey, let's test it. Because the stuff that they've done in the 70s and early 60s, that is all phenomenal. And again, there's no way, shape, or form am I bagging that stuff. But that's not to say that we can't test it and we can't look at it through a different lens, because or even just understand a little bit better the rationale behind some of their loadings. Because all the literature is there, the textbooks that you've got on the periodization stuff, it is there, it's available. But again, it just hasn't been sort of picked at like powerlifting, and whether the powerlifting training methodologies are relatively newer comparative to weightlifting. That could be something, but I think there's a lot of open space to go nuts in it.
And this is more of a speculative question, but the RPE scale has been used with the power lift, but do you see any way that it could be adapted to, say, a snatch or a clean and jerk or a variation? And I know that coaches will use it in a very informal way. So Kate and I, one of the best female weightlifters in the U.S., future Olympian, her coach actually prescribes RPE for the weightlifting movements. And we had a chat with her about that. And I think it's kind of the way I see the way they use it is it's a crude way to say, hey, don't max out, don't miss. It's like an RPE 7 is, it's 3 points away from failure. So it should be relatively easy, smooth, technically good. An RPE 8, a little more difficult. And then you start kind of getting in that gray space where what's a 9, what's a 10, what if you miss it once? Do you see any way at all that an RPE scale could be created for weightlifting, or some sort of auto-regulation means of communication within a training program besides go heavy, go light, don't miss, one miss? Is there any effective way we could communicate like the type of stress or the amount of stress that we want with complex movements like the snatch and the clean and jerk?
Yeah, fascinating. Very fascinating. Yeah, and I guess, you're right. Like, one of the key cornerstones of Eric's great work was our validation of RPE, and it came down to, looking at working up to 1 RMs, with these classically slow movements and validating that against, velocity, barbell velocity. So we could see that, at a 9, near maximal to maximal attempt, that bar speed is at 0.3 meters per second. So it is damn slow. So we were able to validate that. But then that was something that we also talked about and found being a potential issue. Is it's great at the high end stuff, like the high low speed work. But when it comes down to the power based stuff, when movement velocity can be quite variable, that's again where RP becomes quite variable. So that's I guess the next realm is to find an effective way to provide RPE for power based movements. So I guess from a weightlifting point of view, RPE could be really, really effective for your classical movements, like working up to a heavy snatch or clean and jerk day, or even obviously squatting would be fantastic. But then I guess when you look at like a power snatch or power clean, or a fast snatch pull day variant, then that's where RPE could be a little bit tricky. But in saying that, I guess the key take-home message with all these kind of subjective measures is inter and inter-rater reliability. So as long as it's obviously the same athletes providing the same question or the same response, and it's the same coach that is also validating that subjective scale with their own coaching eye, then that will be reliable if that makes sense. I think that's the most important take home there is, I guess you can do it. It's
that makes a lot of sense. Is there, just kind of looking at the other research that you've done since you did get your PhD, is there anything that sticks out as a finding or a concept or something that's helped further inform practice or the way you operate, besides maybe starting to implement the RPE scale with kind of the prescription of load within a training program? Is there any other work you've done where it's really informed the way you plan training or program training?
Yeah, I guess probably two examples. One's I guess probably more of a novelty, a coaching example. It's when I was working with other, while I was weightlifting, a coach of weightlifting, and I'd be asked to work with other teams, whether it was some of our rugby, professional international rugby teams here in New Zealand, and just upskilling their S&Cs and players around good technique and stuff. A lot of the questions would be, are you sure about this hook grip? It's hurting my thumb quite a bit. And then I'd always be like, yeah, no, definitely, you've got to be hook gripping as much as you can, and sort of explain it from a coaching point of view. And I guess that was starting to bug me because I wanted to have a bit of validation behind that. So I guess that goes back to our point around practice informing science. Yeah, so I've actually pumped out two publications around the hook grip with the power clean, and I'm about to release another one shortly around hook grip and lifting straps with the power snatch, just to validate its effectiveness. So I mean, essentially with the power clean, we were able to compare it to a traditional like closed grip position or grip, if you want to call it that, closed grip versus hook grip. And we showed, we're able to demonstrate that with the hook grip, it was produced significantly greater 1RMs. Your kinetic variables like peak velocity, peak power, peak force, and even catch height were significantly greater with the hook grip compared to a closed grip. And we also did things like subjective scales with the participants, and there's greater perceptions of grip security, power, and I guess technical competency with the hook grip. So again, that showed was provided evidence where if people asked your questionnaire, we can say, well, hey, check out this publication. And similar thing on a different front is this publications in the pipeline at the moment is around the use of the closed grip, hook grip, and lifting straps on changes in power snatch performance. So we're looking at it from both kinetic and kinematic point of view. So we're looking at how it influences bar path and velocity and everything. So that's quite cool. So I guess that's one area. And I guess from a different sort of realm or different field is one of my PhD students, Casey Watkins. She just submitted last 2 weeks ago her PhD, but her whole thesis was looking at optimal plyometric doses to improve speed in rugby players. So again, we've got this interesting concept where you look at the literature surrounding plyometric prescription, and some of the literary volumes are massive. You're looking at anywhere up to 400 ground contacts, wow. And that's deemed to be an effective session. Like, that is a lot of jumping. Mm-hmm. But then when you look at what's happening in terms of practice, what the actual S&Cs are prescribing, both nationally and internationally, the ground contacts are ultra low, anywhere between 20 to 50 ground contacts within a session. Mm. So that was the crux of Casey's PhD, is actually working out and identifying what is the actual optimum dosage of plyometrics that is effective. And her her series of studies, some of which are already in publication and print now, have shown that the ultra low volumes which practitioners have been prescribing are actually really, really effective at improving different sprint variables. So, I mean, these, again, it's in contrast to what the literature has been recommending for years. So I guess that's another example where we've kind of taken a devil's advocate point of view and tried to question the dogma that's out there.
I've got a comment and then a question. The comment, it's actually kind of funny. I have followed Louis Simmons' work for a while, and his kind of basic prescription, I guess he gets from some of the Soviet research, but it's 20 reps of jumps twice a week for like more beginners, I guess. And I just kind of do that because I didn't really have a starting point. So we do around 20 jumps twice a week. And so it'll be interesting to read some of that and see how, the volumes can change, but also I guess it kind of depends on the type of jump as well. But yeah, it's really interesting. I never thought there would be that many ground contacts within a training session.
It's crazy.
It's an absurd amount. And then the question with respect to the hook grip, I know coaches have thought about, and you can kind of see this in training too, how lifting straps provide almost like a different bar feel. And anecdotally, from my perspective, I think I relied on them too much, and they actually really helped me stay connected to the bar. I feel like I had a smoother pull, better timing. And then I had to quit them cold turkey because I could barely hit 80% without the lifting straps. So what were you saying with respect to the different, and if you can talk about this, the differences between a lifting strap, a hook grip, and then a closed grip on like the power snatch performance?
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and I'll be a little bit vague on these because we haven't got the publication fully accepted yet, but it was fascinating. So I mean, one of the key take home messages, I mean, we had a mixed sex population, so male and female lifters, and interestingly, we'd seen that the female lifters had significantly higher 1RMs with the lifting straps compared to males. So again, straight away, that's pulling up questions around: is it a function of overall upper body strength, like in terms of grip strength? So there's a lot of literature to say that females, whether they're athletes or untrained or trained populations, grip strength is lower versus males. So again, is that something that the lifting straps are providing female lifters just with that little bit of extra security? In terms of the kinematics and kinetics off the floor, there wasn't too much or too many differences from a statistical point of view between lifting straps and hook grip, which I guess is a good thing. But then when we looked at the subjective, again, like we did with Dustin's Power Clean hook grip paper, we did kinetics, kinematics, but also subjective. Like from a coaching and practical point of view, I stress to these students that having that subjective stuff is so important as well. Like that's where the coaches and athletes want to really know as well. So we had a couple of questionnaires which the participants had to answer, and off the top of my head, there were questions around, on the scale of 1 to 5, how secure does your grip feel off the floor? How secure does it feel during the second pull? How powerful do you feel? Sort of questions like that, and there were around 5 to 6 of those questions. And with the lifting straps, again, there was a lot of statistical significance around, again, I felt great, or more grip security off the floor. I felt more powerful during that second phase. So again, it really highlights what you were speaking to. It gives almost, for want of a better word, a bit of a false sense of security around grip strength and your power ability. But yeah, which is, and I think within our paper with, or actually within the actual thesis for that investigation, we did cite that as an area of concern and an area for future research. Looking at more of a longitudinal approach, and is long-term strap use detrimental to development from that perspective? Yeah,
I've actually quit. I've actually quit straps. And I don't know if I'll go back for the snatch, just because it's also from a competitor's point of view. You don't want something to rely on that when removed, it just lingers with a little bit of doubt as into, you know, what's the role of a strap, how did it help. I'm going heavy, you know, is there anything that could, you know, possibly affect my performance? It's kind of like when people talk about like wraps or a belt or, you know, something like that. As soon as they take it off, even if there is no objective change, just the subjective feeling of it is kind of worrisome. So the last thing I would wonder, based on that, and I guess this will be the last question before we wrap up, because this show is absolutely flown by, is, do you think some sort of grip training intervention for either people with smaller hands or people with, you know, what you would consider like a weaker upper body, or just maybe within like female weightlifters, would be beneficial because they could produce more force, hold on to the bar better, kind of make up for the smaller hands or something like that? Yeah, I've just never really considered the role of grip training, at least within like a female weightlifter's training program.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like grip strength always fascinated me. So it's something that we would routinely, I'd routinely bleed into the weightlifters programs, and even definitely for the youth and developmental lifters, but even some of our senior elite lifters, I'd be getting some grip strength work into them. Because like, as you mentioned, even on the 15 kilo bar, some of our females, our lightweight women, really struggled to get a decent hook grip around that. And that, you know, would have male and female lifters doing the old school, sort of growing up the thumbnail as far as they can to get a bit more leverage on that hook grip. But yeah, I think the grip training is just so important, because I mean, it's, you know, one thing, you know, just at a safety point of view, I mean, I'd happily let lifters snatch with straps, for example, but cleans, like full cleans, never too keen on that. And I mean, I think it was is it Chad Vaughan that broke his wrists?
Oh, Zach Critch.
Oh, was it? Yeah. I mean, I remember watching that video. Broken wrists with the old clean, and yeah, I mean, that always scared me. But yeah, I mean, I think just for overall athleticism, I mean, I think that's a great new cliffhanger CrossFit challenge out there at the moment. Just that dead hang from a bar, you know, that's something that any athlete should be really striving for. You know, it's a good overall ability to have.
Yeah, I actually never thought about that, because I program on a lot of like knee raises just for like, I guess like what you would consider ab work. And I didn't think about just telling people, hey, don't use straps, do as many reps as you can, do 5 sets, hold it. That's actually a fantastic idea. And start programming that in. But Adam, man, this has been a fantastic episode of the podcast, and one that's really got me, you know, I always love these because it just makes me more excited to train and to program and to read research, which is always nice. It helps like stoke the fire a little bit. You know, as of what you're doing now, maybe you could fill us in on what your roles are within the sporting world, where you're looking to take, you know, future research or your career, and what your plans are as of now and then heading forward.
Yeah, I guess after the Rio Olympics, I officially hung up my weightlifting coach's hat. But since then, as you mentioned, still actively involved in research around all things strength and conditioning and exercise physiology. But I do have a bit of a bias to the old weightlifting stuff still, which is cool. And I guess from a practitioner point of view, I'm definitely first and foremost a practitioner. So I'm a lead strength and conditioner for Emirates Team New Zealand. So that's the America's Cup team here in New Zealand. So I'm not too sure if many weightlifters, sailors out there as well. But I guess the America's Cup, that's kind of like the Formula One of the sailing world. So these new boats are pretty phenomenal in terms of the speeds that they get up to. So that's been a cool experience for me. And I'm also the lead of strength and conditioning for Canoe Racing New Zealand as well. So that's working predominantly with the sprint kayak team. And again, that's been a great great learning adventure for me. It's interesting. I've gone from weightlifting to now working primarily with 2 water-based sports. But yeah, I mean, my rationale to work with both of those sports is they're sports that are really dear to the hearts of New Zealanders here. We've got a strong sailing history here in New Zealand, and with our kayak program at the moment, we've got some amazing athletes in there. For example, we've got fortunate to work with the likes of Lisa Carrington. So she's a double Olympic champion, and all things going to plan. She's on target to win quite a few medals in Tokyo. That all goes ahead, so it's been a fantastic opportunity for me to be able to work with athletes of that caliber, and just to, again, I'm all about upskilling and learning myself. So to be able to surround myself with those athletes, but also the coaches that they work with, I'm learning so much on a daily basis. So it's been a cool experience.
Yeah, and then knowing that, I guess this is the very last question. Just hearing that you also, I didn't realize coached at Rio, but in your time in the sport of weightlifting as a coach, what's the one of the memories that really sticks out, or maybe the most impressive thing that you've seen, or your favorite moment, be it competition, a lift, a training session, something like that? What do you look back really fondly on?
Man. Oh, geez. Yeah, man, I got some goodies. Yeah, I mean, I guess from a personal point of view, yeah, probably one of my favourites was one of my lifters, Tracy Lambricks, winning the bronze medal at the 2014 Commonwealth Games. I mean, Tracy went on to compete at the Rio Olympics, which you could arguably say that's the pinnacle of her career. But again, New Zealanders have such a rich history at the Commonwealth Games, and that was just a medal which a lot of people had completely written her off winning. And so for us to go through what she did to win that medal, that was, I guess, something that, it literally brought me to tears on competition day. So that one's burnt into my brain. But yeah, and I guess from a competition point of view, it's being in the training halls at the World Champs or Olympics, you see a lot of freaky stuff going on, which is, again, a lot of cool things. It's and I guess the competition which stuck in my mind was, I guess, Klokov's 105 comp at the 2011 World Champs in Paris. We had that great one-to-one lift battle with his fellow compatriot to take, unfortunately, silver at that competition in Paris. But no, that was a cool one to watch.
Yeah, I could only imagine being there. I think that's probably one of the most watched battles, Klokov versus Akayev. And
yeah.
Man, Klokov, if you've ever seen anyone who's been at the top but never quite reached it, I think it would be him. Seemed like every chance he had, it was kind of either taken from him or he had to pull out of the competition. But yeah, Adam, where can people keep up with you if they want to look at, either your work? I am incredibly fascinated to read your dissertation at this point. So if it's the work you've done on the hook grip, the the RPE scale, any of that, where can we direct people to check that out, or to keep up with you on your social media, and to get in contact with you if they want to record a podcast or have a chat?
Yeah, sure. Unfortunately, I'm a bit of a social media dinosaur. I've always been that way. So, but that I guess that's just how it is. I just like to sort of focus on what I want to focus on. So, yeah, I'm not too much about the public exploitation myself. But in terms of the research, yeah, definitely. Just on Google Scholar, you can easily just look up Adam Storey. So that's Storey, and then some of the publications will pop up in the different spaces. Or if you want to check out, you can head to the AUT website, and more specifically, it's a Sports Performance Research Institute. So that's the department that I'm involved with at AUT, and you'll be able to definitely get all the contact details there, and see, get a brief synopsis of the research areas that I'm currently involved with, or looking to get involved with, if anyone out there is interested in doing a bit of postgrad stuff as well.
Awesome. Well, everyone who is listening and continued to listen to the podcast up to this point, we really appreciate it. If you liked it, leave a review. I've heard that helps the podcast grow. You can leave a comment. You can share it around with your friends and your family. And we will catch you guys next week on another episode of the Philosophical Weightlifting Podcast.